Welcome back, Woo Crew, to the Woo Curious podcast. I'm your host, Ellie, and I'm here with
Eileen.
As always. We're here to bring you another episode, this time on Yule and Yule traditions and paganism and all things holiday, this December holiday. But first, Eileen, I think you have a new review to read out to us. Is this correct?
I do, yes. I have one all pulled up and ready to go. This is on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, rather, which is, as far as we know, the only place you can leave a review. I don't think Spotify lets you. So here it is for today. This is from Doll Ran. The title is Amazing Listen for Us Witchy Babes, and it's a 5-star review, obviously. And Dalran says, I am someone who goes in and out of witchy practices. I love how excited this podcast got me into practicing again. Great topics, and it feels like I'm chatting with friends on my couch. 100% recommend.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you so much.
It's so perfect. That's exactly how we want people to feel, is how we feel. We're just chatting.
Just
friends on the couch.
On our couches. Well, actually on our office chairs mostly, but
yeah,
practically the same thing.
Practically, for sure. So thank you, Dalran.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we also have events that have happened and are coming up for our Patreon membership. So if you don't know, we're going to talk about the Patreon membership at the end of the episode. But for those of you that are in it, we've just had our new moon card reading, which is very exciting. And what's coming up is our Witch's Corner, which is like a Q&A coven chit chat to ask all your questions about anything witchy and woo and everything in between. And ongoing for the month of December, we're reading If Women Rise Rooted. And I'm so excited about that book. I know it's your favorite.
It's so good. Yeah, it's my favorite for sure. It's so beautiful, and I'm so glad to be revisiting it. And there will be some questions for thought posted in the Patreon this week. And yeah, we're just really, really looking forward to getting to gather at the end of the month and chat about it. It is a beautiful starting point for the book club.
Okay, let's talk about magical moments. What magical thing happened to you in the last week? Did anything come up?
The thing that immediately jumps to my mind, and so I'm going to roll with it, is the Christmas party that I was at on Saturday. It was a friend's Christmas gathering, and it was a riot because it's a group of people that I play D&D with. If you're on our Patreon, you're getting a little extra behind the scenes D&D chit chat.
And a revelation from me, a mind-blowing revelation from me.
Right. So yeah, I was there on Saturday night, and the thing that's magical for me is just the group of people. They're so genuine. They're so lovely. They really accept people for their whole selves. All of them do. It's just a really, really genuine group of folks. And we just sang karaoke all night, which makes my little Leo rising heart
take center stage and sing.
Yeah. And I had lots of co-singer. Like, there was a lot of people who were like, yeah, I'm into this, let's get up and sing karaoke in the living room. So that was pretty magical. Yeah, it was great. Stayed up a little bit too late, drank a little too much wine, and by too late I mean I was in bed by midnight. But
just so we're clear,
it's too late. The wine was the piece, but it was a really fun, lovely night with friends.
I love this. Yeah. I love, you know what, my favorite part about this time of the year is just the gatherings, the intentional gatherings. You know, we have summer solstice and winter solstice. This time of year is all about the gathering. Our shoulder seasons are all about like the work and the effort. And these two opposite ends of the spectrum are all about the gathering. So I also had a bit of a Christmas soiree this week. I'm part of a really amazing entrepreneur network called the East Van Entrepreneur Network. And one of the originators is somebody who owns a local health clinic, an integrative clinic. And so we meet at the clinic every month, snacks and appies and those sorts of things. And so I realized on my way over how important, as I plan my next year, how important it's going to be for me to do gatherings more often. And just really casual gatherings food and with people and with like casual conversation, because I think there's so many magical things that happen. And one of the women, this is not the magical moment, but this is also a secondary to it. One of the women that sat next to me, I had never met before, and she's a somatics coach. And it was just really, she was like, hey, wait a minute. I made reference to my high priestess and how her and I are doing things differently in the next year. And she said, okay, I just need to clarify what you mean by like you are high priestess. And I was like, oh, pull up a seat, please. Anyways, I think things may happen between us in the future. Instantly, I was like, wait a minute, we both do embodiment work. Wait a minute, we both work on sensuality. Wait a minute, how do we move? How do we go together? How do we make this into a workshop for people of the East Vancouver community? So I think that we'll do something. We'll see. Amy, if you're listening to this, hello. And then the magical moment is that I was gifted these incredible, I wish I had them with me, they're in the other room, these incredible homemade tea lights that are black with a pentacle on top from Britt of West Coast Marketing. And there's sparkle in them. And so when you light them, they shimmer. And she gave them to me and I literally was like, oh my gosh. So I have these wonderful pentacle. The reason we have them is because they're set up with the Yule stuff on the kitchen table. But they're going to be lit during our ceremony for Yule.
I love that. That just reminded me of the gift that I got in my Secret Santa with my D&D friends, which was a tarot deck that's Dungeons and Dragons themed.
Can we like get a round of applause for whoever purchased that? Like, thank you for just
Kelsey Hipkin.
Kelsey, you are the winner of gifts this Christmas for the Secret Santa.
Yeah, it was so good. I screeched a little bit when I opened it. I was like, yes,
I love this. Excellent. Magical moments, we're here for them. If you had a magical moment this week, come share it with us over on our Instagram page at the.woocurious.podcast. You can find us there. We have a great lineup of content coming out at you for the next little bit. So come find us.
And tag us in your stories if you're referencing the podcast, if something that you're doing came up because you were listening to the podcast. We love hearing about, where you're listening, how you're engaging. It's really fun for us.
Yes, indeed. Shall we talk about our pagan traditions? Shall we talk about Yule?
Yeah, I think we shall.
I just have to say, I'm so excited about this because there is, in the formatting of this and the formulation really of this episode, there's so many things that came out that Eileen was telling me that I literally was just like mouth agape, stunned about, like, oh my goodness. And so I'm really excited for you to drop some little tidbits of education as we go along.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm trying to find, there we are. It's like I've got so much in my brain. I'm trying to find my little notes because I'm a notes gal. It's when you start to dive into all of the Wheel of the Year ceremony celebrations, there's so many little rabbit holes to follow, but I find that Yule has probably the most. And it's because it is the biggest Wheel of the Year celebration for Muggles. As it were, still, right? Christmas is everywhere. It's massive. It's a huge holiday for most of the Northern Hemisphere, at the very least. And so this episode is going to just barely like scratch the surface. But so many of our traditions that we think of as Christmas traditions have pagan roots. And while some of them were, fully co-opted by the church, as things go when you're trying to get a new religion to take root, it's a good idea to like integrate some of the pagan traditions that are happening around the same times of year. I think that often does a little bit of a disservice. There were certainly men in power who blatantly did try to co-opt pagan traditions and use them to convert people. But more often than not, it's just the lay folk who continued to practice their traditions. And over time, they got woven in. They maybe shifted meanings as they adopted a new faith. And so I think there is that. We often point blame at the Christian church, and for good reason in a lot of cases. But a lot of times it really wasn't malevolent or malicious the way that we sometimes think it was. So I do want to point that out if I'm saying anything that you're like, but there is that undertone here of most of this was just a really beautiful weaving together as people shifted through different faiths. So some of the things that have pagan traditions or pagan roots that we now really associate with Christmas. Let's start with Christmas caroling. I love this one. As I was reading about it, you may have heard the term wassailing, because I think here we go, a wassailing is something that some of us may remember. I know that for me, this was a familiar term, and it's this idea of going door to door, drinking, singing, drinking to the health of your neighbors. But this one actually goes way back pre-Christian. I'm pretty sure, actually, when I was doing my reading, I'm not sure if it said, but I would suspect in the kind of UK area, fertility rites. It's similar in a lot of ways to Beltane, where they'd go out and have wild times in the fields to bless the fields. And only this time it is traveling through the fields, shouting, singing to drive away the spirits that might inhibit the growth of future crops. So again, blessing the fields, as it were, protecting them. And caroling didn't begin in churches until around the 13th century, I guess. St. Francis.
A little bit about wassailing, but we might have called it, so you might have called it something different in our Samhain episode as well, because we had this going door to door, singing, instead of saying trick or treat, it was really just this, libation and boisterous fun that was happening.
Yeah, that was mumming.
Mumming. There we go.
Yeah, which is, there are very similar traditions that I'm sure they probably both have like originated in the same roots, where mumming involved a little bit of dressing up though, and the trick piece, there was a little bit of rascaliness to mumming.
But of course.
Whereas the wassailing is more just like, yeah, let's make fun. A nice toasty beverage, good clean fun, go sing and toast to our neighbors. I actually, growing up, I haven't done this in ages, but when I was kind of in my early teens, I want to say, a bunch of our friends in Canmore had a tradition of going caroling door to door on Christmas Eve. And I very distinctly remember it was really a fun time. There was probably 10 or 15 of us all drinking our hot chocolate, and my uncle wouldn't let me have his, and I couldn't figure out why.
I know why.
I know why now. And singing carols, and our neighbors would come out on their front porches in the like cozy glow of the Christmas lights and listen and clap and cheer, and we'd just say Merry Christmas and go on to the next house.
Oh my gosh, what like wholesome family fun this is.
Right? Yeah, I totally forgot about that till just now.
I love this.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about kissing underneath the mistletoe.
Yeah, this one, there's two different kind of ways that we could potentially follow back the tradition, and quite possibly one influenced the other long before, but the one that's like really an obvious link is the Roman tradition. So Romans celebrated something called, or they still may, some of them, Saturnalia, celebrating the god Saturn around the solstice. It started on the 17th of December, and it was a week-long festival. So it culminated on the solstice. And there's all sorts of merriment that goes on through this week. It was a role reversal time. So the servants would actually like get to run the house. The masters would serve them. To an extent, they might serve them their meal. The servants probably still cooked the meal from what we know, but it was definitely like loud and boisterous. And I mean, if anybody knew how to have a good time and throw a party, it was the Romans.
True.
But they actually conducted fertility rites under the mistletoe. So there's that aspect. That's the very like, okay, yeah, let's get frisky under the mistletoe. There's also a tradition, if we go back through Germanic history to Norse warriors, that would come together, meeting under mistletoe and laying down arms to have like peace talks or treaties. So there's that association too, and it's associated with Frigga, who is the goddess of love, the Norse goddess of love. That's fun.
I love this. We have a big holly tree in our backyard that I absolutely adore. I cut bits off and bring it in every year.
Yeah.
And my mama at one point as well said, "You have a holly tree?" And so I sent her some holly. Actually, I'm putting together a package for her. Mama, if you're listening to this, you're getting some holly this year.
Love it. Yeah, holly is very much associated with, again, protection.
Yeah.
And the Holly King, we'll get into that myth for sure.
Yes.
I've never kissed anyone under mistletoe. I remember when I was little, I thought that was not little, preteen. I thought that was like the most romantic notion ever. It never
Your
happened.
love of this holiday, of this season, makes me want to love this season.
I'm glad. I'm glad I can rub off on you. Have you ever kissed anyone under the mistletoe?
I feel like I have kissed somebody under the mistletoe, but I feel like I know that I have. I definitely, my ex-wife and I definitely smooched underneath the mistletoe anytime that we saw it because it was just like a thing, but we rarely saw
Yeah.
a mistletoe. So
They're not really common.
no, no.
No.
But I'm surprised at how many people do hang holly in their doorways for this tradition, and it's
Yeah.
not something that we ever did in my household. But I was shocked when I started going to other people's houses at how many people had holly hanging in the doorway.
Yeah, I never had it in the doorway, but I definitely remember having like a holly. It was plastic, but a holly ornament that was part
Mm-hmm.
of what we brought out every year. And it was the idea of bringing in these evergreens at this time of year really was this kind of celebration of the return of the light and this representation of that which is coming back or doesn't die, that piece that holds us through. That can go back to neuroscience if we want to. Like, greenery is good for our brains. And so whether or not our ancestors knew that from a logical point of view, I'm sure that was a piece of it as well, this bringing the greenery inside when everything outside is still cold and snowy and dark.
And I just did a little like quick Goog research. Thanks, Googs. And mistletoe, I did not know, is actually like something that looks for a host tree to grow on. And it
Yes, I
was
was just
fall.
reading that. Yeah. Yeah, it gets not noxious, but it's invasive. Like, it has to live on something else. There's some traditions of druids going in, and like a part of their ceremony with mistletoe around this time was to slice it off of the host trees, like to take it off because it grows on oak.
Of course it grows on oak.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
see that. Of course, mistletoes are symbol of fertility, and that's why we've laid down our weapons, and we've maybe gotten a little spicy underneath it, bringing in the tradition of fertility. It is the darkest time of the year. We're just welcoming in the new light, and therefore, what else is there to do?
Right. Yeah. There's a reason there's a baby boom in September and October.
Yeah,
Just saying.
as an October baby, yes.
Yes, the busy time of year for midwives. So gift giving too, again, there's a bit of overlap between a few different traditions here, likely. Part of gift giving certainly goes back to Saint Nicholas, who was a Christian bishop in the 4th century. So it is a Christian tradition in a lot of ways. But the idea of, jolly old Saint Nick who comes down the chimney, leaving stockings out, that's more of an ancient Germanic, again, harking back to the Norse mythology piece. That is probably from there. We don't know for sure because there's not like a written record of all of this, tracing it back cleanly. But Odin was said to ride through the air on his 8-legged steed. And which I can't get the image in my head, but it just feels weird. But this steed could jump and leap and go travel great distances, like in one fell jump. And Odin's often depicted as a big old dude with a white beard, and so he's got that kind of jolly old Saint Nick appearance in some ways. And children would leave their boots out by the chimney with carrots and hay and stuff for Odin's steed, and he would leave gifts in return. And so that's where likely we got this tradition of hanging stockings. And when the Dutch came over to North America from Europe, they brought this tradition of hanging stockings or putting out boots, and then that turned into stockings eventually. And the name Santa Claus was a Dutch name for Saint Nick that ended up being anglicized and just turned into Santa Claus.
Sinterklaas.
Sinterklaas. And it wasn't until I think it was 1820, I think I read, that Christmas was it became advertised, like started to turn into the commercial holiday that it is now, not until the 1800s. And mid 1800 is when we get the poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And the dude who wrote that poem made up the names for the reindeer. I read that, I was like, oh, of course somebody had to have made up the reindeer names.
I also love it. Like an eight, I can picture an eight-legged horse. Like it's just like what a phenomenon. I sort of picture I don't remember the character name, but in Hercules, you know, Herc, the centaur. I sort of picture a centaur. I don't know how it got into a centaur with 8 legs, but here we are. And I just love that it's now the reindeer that are leading the way for Santa Claus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fun one for sure. I think there's probably some more mythology there too. Again, you know, reindeer come from the part of the world where all this Norse mythology comes from. And so I think there's a lot of weavings in there likely that I didn't unearth. But we mentioned decking the halls already, bringing in boughs of greenery. The idea of decorating a Christmas tree, bringing a tree inside and having decorations on it is actually a Christian tradition. It often gets misattributed to pagan roots. And there are threads of pagan roots there too. But the whole idea of bringing a tree inside to decorate was, I believe it was 14th century. I don't have those notes in front of me, but it wasn't stolen, that one, quote unquote. It was not co-opted from elsewhere. There was likely traditions of hanging ornaments. I mean, the Romans again did this during Saturnalia. They would hang metal ornaments outside on trees. They would represent either, you know, a god or Saturn himself or a patron deity. But there's also some potentials in that Germanic tradition too, where there was decorations of trees or things outside. But that bringing in of a Christmas tree really is a Christian tradition. So they can keep it.
They can have it.
They can have it. I mean, I have it too. I love decorating a tree, as I love all of this stuff, clearly. And then there's the Yule log, which today, most people, when you think of a Yule log, you're going to picture that roulade cake that's like a swirl of chocolate and white cake, which I love that balance. That's like the light and the dark. That's a fun thing that is brought in, and it's iced to look like a log. Originally, it would have been a log that was burned. Bonfires or fires are always part of these solstice, any solar celebration, the cross quarter days as well, and the wheel of the year. All 8 wheel of the year ceremonies are very much associated with fire and burning, and it's life-giving and life-sustaining for humans. Fire has been so important. And so they would light a log, and it may have been, you know, a smaller Yule log that would be on a family hearth. There is some reference in some of the texts to a really large log that would burn for the full 12 days, because here we go again. The 12 days of Christmas began as Yuletide, which was actually 12 days of Yule, began on the solstice and ended on the 1st of January.
The greatest week of the year.
The greatest week of the year. The greatest, almost 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, you're right, actually. Wow. Okay, now that we know what we know about where some of these pagan traditions came from and Christian traditions and how they've all melded together, let's talk specifically about Yule and what Yule is and how we can celebrate Yule.
Let's. Yes. So we've mentioned it's the winter solstice. It is the longest night of the year. And so because of this, you know, these solar events, the solstices, the equinoxes, they are celebrated by cultures worldwide throughout time. And so there's no claiming of these dates as specific. But when we think about Yule today, in the modern context, we're thinking about it as a pagan holiday, as a European holiday for sure. A lot of what we carry through into this time is European descent. And for myself, it's always harkening back to that. What are the Celtic traditions associated with this time? Because that's my lineage. And so I love the story of the Holly King and the Oak King. Here's where these pregnant pauses that Ellie and I had as we're like, but mistletoe grows on oak.
Of course it does.
Of course it does. There's a Celtic myth that the Holly King and the Oak King fight twice a year. They have a big battle. and they alternate who wins. And so the Holly King is associated with the dark, and the Oak King is associated with the light. And so at the summer solstice, they battle, and the Holly King wins. And so the nights begin to get longer and longer. And at the winter solstice, they fight again, and the Oak King wins. And so then we have the returning of the light and all the celebration associated with that. And so there's lots of those themes, right? That theme of light and dark and balance and introspection and quiet and turning inward, but also like a celebration of, ooh, soon we get to turn back outwards and things will start growing again.
I think what I really love about all things woo and witchy is just how balanced nature is. Like we're constantly looking to nature to show us what it is that we need to know. Like the highest intelligence really comes from nature. And every time we do this, we learn something, or we're reflected in something is reflected in ourselves. And so I really crave the darkening of the times during this year, like especially November, December hits, and I'm in hibernation mode. I'm in this, like, let's get cozy. My clothing changes, the textures change, what we eat changes. You and I talked about eating soup. And then, I start to crave the sun. What I'm skipping over in my head as I speak is the reason I left Ontario is because there's no sun. Actually, there's lots of sun. Here on the West Coast, we have way less sun over here. And I really start to crave that sunshine again. But in Ontario, it's still cold for 6 more months, practically. And so it's interesting to see how I crave the coziness and the coolness as we hit fall, and I crave that sun and that light and that warmth probably as soon as we hit January, February.
Yeah, me too. That's why my partner and I are leaving this year. We're like, we will do winter until January and then see you later. We're out of here.
And then we'll go back to summer.
Yeah, it's a long season here. And it's interesting because obviously different parts of the world experience it differently. But I've really, as I've gotten older, I've embraced the cold and the turning inwards and yeah, this is cozy and I love it. And for me too, it's like mid-January to early Feb. And I'm like, that's it. I'm done. Which, if I think about my ancestry, Imbolc, which is February 1st, that is like a spring celebration. That is Yu's about to give birth to lambs. They're not doing that here because their lambs would freeze to death.
Yeah.
And things starting to push up through the soil. And here it's still very much the cold depths of winter. So I think there's that sense in my body that like this season lasts a little too long here. Just a little.
Here on the West Coast, we already have crocus poking up through the earth around Feb 1st.
Yeah.
Here we are.
That feels better.
Come to the wet coast.
Yeah. But yeah, so part of the reason that we get some of these, traditions of bonfires and lighting candles and all of these pieces is because it is cold, it is dark, and we're needing to bring some of that light in to get through the long dark and the cold dark. And you mentioned connection too, right? This celebrating together. Historically, there wouldn't have been much else to do. It wasn't really pleasant to be outside for very long. There wasn't much light. You didn't have electricity. And so gathering with friends and family to feast and celebrate would have been really needed in the depths of winter.
It's totally time to do that. Yeah, the celebrations around this year are most definitely my favorite part. I think as well, this is a good opportunity for us to sit with the darkness and for us to sit with death. This is our winter, our death season. This is our hibernation. This is our time that we get to reflect on how far we've come. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but just it's the time to go inward and to be in darkness. And I remember that a lot of what I loved as a kid was just how dark the night was, just how incredibly dark the night was. And the sky, especially whenever the stars were out, how reflective that was on the snow in that moment. So
yeah, I noticed that falling asleep the other night. We finally had snow again here. We got some in October, and then it's been unseasonably warm and actually rained last week, which is bizarre. But we got snow and I couldn't sleep because it was so freaking bright. Because all of the all the street, I'm in the city, all the street lights and stuff reflect off of the snow, and it's incredible. And so you can imagine being out of the city lights and just having the starlight and the moonlight reflecting. The moon on the crest of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below.
Speaking of romance.
Speaking of romance, I know that whole poem.
I love
I
this.
memorized it as a kid. I loved it so much.
I don't know if I've met somebody who is like loved this season like you gutturally love this season. Like I know people who love Christmas kitsch and putting things up and gift giving out, but you love the tradition.
I do. I really do. I don't know what, and it's so interesting because we've said on previous episodes, I haven't believed in Santa since because I asked my mother when I was 2 years old how he got in the house. We didn't have a chimney, and she told me the truth.
Yeah.
And so it's not that. That's not the magic of it for me. It's always just been about
The gathering.
yeah, the joy and the celebration and the gathering and the singing together, carols. We had carols in the gym when through middle school and high school. We got to go sit and sing carols, and so that was always great. We got to go out of class and sing together. I was delighted.
I know that you did not go to school for theater, but you really should have.
I tried for a bit. I was too painfully shy.
It's true. You need to be like the backup, the in the background instead of in the foreground of whatever this is. How can we sing together? How can we make this a musical where we
Yeah.
all sing together?
Nowadays, I'm not too shy. I put me in the middle. It's fine.
The
Cue the spotlight.
Leo sun has come out.
Yes, she has risen.
Perfect. Tell me, you have some really interesting tidbits about the feasts that we have at this time of year.
Yeah, again, in my deep dive research, preparing for my own Yule ceremonies, which will be over by the time you're listening to this. But it was interesting because one of the themes I speak to at Samhain is always, thinking about, okay, the harvest is done, the food stores are put away, we go into the long dark. And part of that is a bit of an insecurity around, did we harvest enough? Do we have enough food to get us through? And so my brain was like, well, but then why is there all this feasting in the middle of winter? Like that feels maybe a little bit frivolous if you have limited food stores. But the tradition, again, Norse history, it was really far north. It was really cold. There was very limited food, and they had livestock. And so they would be, at this point of the winter, they would slaughter a lot of their livestock because they didn't actually have the feed to get them through the rest of the winter, the animals themselves. And so they'd keep kind of a minimum stock on hand to breed and to replenish their herds. And then they'd have all of this meat available. And so they actually could gather and feast and, yeah, meat pies. And I don't know, turkeys are a North American thing, but that's a later addition.
Poultry.
Poultry,
Bird.
yeah. Birds, but mostly, yeah, you think about the venison and pie and stew and roast and all of that kind of stuff would have been more traditional with this time of year, and it would have been plentiful.
It's interesting. My family always had a turkey at Christmas and always had turkey at Thanksgiving and then had ham in Easter. And in my adulthood now, in the last few years, I have gone back to, we're having beef. We're having whatever kind of roast we can. So we've said goodbye to poultry and we have moved on to the other meats in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That I just really love. And I love making something like that. And I love the richness of it, the real rich flavor of the food and the gravy and the vegetables and the earthiness of the roots and whatnot. So
yeah, it's so good. My brother-in-law likes to do something that's not turkey. A lot of us still want some turkey, so I usually am in charge of making some turkey. I got half a turkey this year, which is easier to cook. And one year he did half a turkey. Yeah, my butcher will cut it right in half for me, which is great because I usually spatchcock it to cook it anyways, because then it cooks more evenly. And let me tell you, spatchcocking a turkey, last year I bent my cast iron scissors, so my shears. So
Wow.
I'm glad that he's doing it for me this year.
Yeah.
But we did one year, my brother-in-law made beef Wellington. Last year he did pork belly with like crackling. It was so good. I think we're gonna do that again this year. So
I did a roast
it's
pork. I did 2 roast porks last year. I did a roast ham and I did
mm-hmm.
a roast shoulder blade, and I
Mm.
roasted them both on a charcoal barbecue all day long.
Oh, delightful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
come on
Yeah,
over.
we had a feast last year, but there was maybe a few too many dishes that all needed the oven at different temperatures.
Oh, the
We
plague of
ended
the
up with the
holiday.
barbecue. I was like finishing the turkey on the barbecue.
This is exactly why I used a barbecue all day.
Yeah, exactly.
How are we gonna do those pie? Okay.
Right?
Unless it's
Yeah.
sometime afterwards. My grandmother actually always, she was appalled one year. She always came to my house in adulthood. We always hosted a Christmas meal, and she always came to my house, and she was appalled one year that I made a pie, but like at the same time as dinner. Like, why wouldn't I make that pie in the morning? Then it would cool enough.
Right.
And I
Right.
literally said to her, Granny, what a brilliant idea. I will now
It's
make
like
my pie in the morning.
it's like you might know a thing or two about the kitchen,
Yeah, and raising many children and cooking for all of them.
cooking for
Like,
all of them.
hi, everybody. This is a public service announcement. Make your pie the day before or in the morning. And then
Yeah.
if it's apple, you just heat it back up a little bit so that you can put your. Is anybody else a fan of old white cheddar? We always got bricks of old cheddar in our stocking because I know we all love old cheese. And so you put that on your apple pie. Oh my God, chef's kiss.
I've
Apple,
not had it, but I've had a lot of people talk about cheddar cheese on their apple pie, and it does sound delicious to me.
it is so good. Leave your ice cream at home, okay? Do not touch me with your ice cream. I just want cheddar cheese on my apple pie. And your whipped cream, I'll have a side dish of that. But no, cheddar cheese
Yeah.
on my apple pie, please.
Amazing. Oh, we also I'd love to bring in the ancestors here. I think this is something that I speak to it at every Wheel of the Year ceremony, but I think everybody can probably really relate to bringing ancestral traditions and foods and things into this particular holiday because it is the one that so many of us have handed down. And so it's a great time to acknowledge them, to honor them, to call them in by cooking their traditional foods or honoring their traditions that they had around the holiday season. And I like to sit as well and always just kind of acknowledge again, this time of year would have been a celebration, but also there was uncertainty in the depths of winter. And so, what they had to do to survive through the winter, I like to just give thanks for the fact that they had the tenacity and were able to carry on in the midst of long, dark, cold, whatever else that's even hard to really imagine from this place in my very well heated home.
I want to also say, as a little fun thing, so the pies that I make are on my grandmother's recipe, speaking of ancestors and holiday traditions. And I also love, my former partner was Korean, and one of the traditions is to have a place setting out for an ancestor.
Mm.
And it's just such a lovely, like, and let's invite them to this meal. Let's
Mhm.
include them. And I just really love that tradition that we had.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It is. And that's something that is associated with Samhain as well. But I really do like the idea. For me, there's a lot of ancestor presence in Yule because of the traditions and the ceremony around it. Whereas, the traditions associated with Samhain are much more ancient. For many of us, we don't have a direct connection to them. Often we're revitalizing these very old connections. And so Yule is different in that, when I make my grandma's shortbread cookies, they were hers. And I remember making them with her and eating hers, and I still can't get them as good as she got them. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And just all of that, we eat Christmas dinner on her china that she gave to my mom. I can't remember the name. It's like some fancy French china. It's chipped a little bit, but like we have this big fancy meal on this china that we then have to hand wash.
Of course, you have to hand wash
Of
it. It probably
course.
has gold. My china from my grandmother
Does.
has gold around the outside of the plate. You can't
Yeah.
put that in a dishwasher.
No, you can't. It'll ruin. So there's all that really direct connection. My grandmother also passed us down the tradition for my family of eating cheese and fruit for breakfast. Cheese, fruit, and croissants. That's our
Ooh.
Christmas breakfast.
I love this. We are a casserole kind of family, a breakfast casserole kind of family. But I do want to tell you about my grandmother's shortbread, because my grandmother was such a spitfire. She's this little Scottish 4'0" spitfire, raised 5 children on her own. We don't need no man. You know, the definition of feminist in her day without ever identifying as a feminist. This is her. This is Granny. We called her Ninja. We called her Ninja because whenever she hugged you, she slapped you on the back so hard she'd just pop your head right off. Like, she just was a tough individual. Soft innard, hard outer. And I would say to her, Granny, I want your shortbread recipe. And every time I asked her, it became a joke. She'd say, oh, you don't want that recipe. I said, Granny, I want your recipe. Come on, I want to make the shortbread this year. You don't want that recipe. You don't want that recipe because you got to work it. You got to work it, you got to work it, and you got to work it. And I said, Granny, I'll work it. And I didn't know what she meant. So finally, she gives me the recipe this one year. She's sitting in my kitchen. Oh, we had this stool that we called our Granny stool. And she's telling me, okay, you have to, it's a pound of butter. And it's a pound or so of flour. Like, it's something ridiculous.
4 cups of flour, pound of butter, cup of sugar, pinch of salt. That's it.
I don't even know if there's salt in mine. I'm going to have to check my recipe. And she then is like, you have to then divide it into 4 or 5, and you got to work each ball. So divide it into 4 or 5 balls, and you got to work. And she would just literally, straight face, you got to work it, you got to work it, and you got to work it. I was like, Granny, I'm going to work it. So that next year, I made it in my KitchenAid, bypassing all of the working it. And I was like, Granny, what do you think of the shortbread? And she's like, oh, it's pretty good. It's hard to make, how you got to work it. I was like, I worked it. I worked it real hard. Yeah. You got to work it, and you got to work it. You're like, her exasperation about working it. And I thought, I'll show you.
Modern kitchens. Here we come. Let's chat a little bit about celebrating the solstice, specifically about ceremony, about intentions, and that piece of this, because it is so easy to, obviously we get wrapped up in the way that we celebrate, which most of us is going to be on the 25th or the 24th, depending on your tradition. But as we bring more of Yule back in, we can think about how to mark the day. So I'd love to hear if you have any specific things that you do or traditions that you follow on Yule itself.
I do, actually. This year I have some things. Things are different this year. We're being way more intentional. My lover and I have, for the last couple of years, really taken a step back from any traditional traditions that we would have had around Christmas, around the 25th. And although my family has been super low-key, and she is also extremely low-key, now that we are together and we live in a place where neither of us have extended family, we really just kind of flew by the seat of our pants in every moment and said, what do we want? Not a big plan of anything. Last year was the first year that we actually did a bigger meal. We had some extended family who are here, and that was so lovely. I have this big harvest table to share. But this year, with our intentions of how we want to move into this, is a lot about calling back the light. And so we have a fireplace, and so we're planning fires, of course, probably from now until February, in bulk, and beyond, for that matter. But on the 21st specifically, which is this week, we'll do a fire. I have a bough set up on the table with some holly and my candles and some orange slices. The thing that I've always disliked about Christmas in quotations and the holidays is the rush to relax, the rush to get everything done so that we can finally sit down and relax. And so I am just in every moment starting to really take a relaxed schedule and creative outlet when it comes to whatever it is that we're doing. So fire, decorating the bough on the table, so that on our big harvest table, I have a lot of candles. I've talked in the past about my love of candles, and so we'll probably light more candles in the house. And the thing that I'm most excited about is just the amount of feasts that we're going to have. And then, of course, divination tools all the time. So I always do a reading for the upcoming year and a reflection of the past, of what happened over the past year. So I look back at the things that happen, like major events in life, and I look back at the reading that I did for last year and just kind of call in the big picture of what to expect. And interestingly enough, as I looked back just the other day, took a little peek, May was this explosive year with a lot of change and whatnot happening. And this is the month that my father passed away, and it's like everything came crashing down. And in the moment, last December when I did this, I thought to myself, I wonder what that would be, because my father was, in that sense, nowhere near death. So I'm really excited for that. Tell me about your traditions. Tell me about what it is that you're going to do.
Yeah. I really just started celebrating Yule as Yule, like the solstice itself in definitely last year. And I can't even remember if I did it the year before. Oh, I did. Yeah. I held a little ceremony for myself and two friends with the themes. But I really liked having, and I'm doing the same this year, my kind of social gathering pieces before and after Yule itself, because much like the new moon, I really have this craving and desire to just be alone and like have that inward introspective time. Last year, I lit a fire in my fireplace and I listened to a yoga nidra. And then one of the people that I follow, I was on her Patreon. She's since paused it, but her name's Kale Clausen, and she does readings and she does horoscope kind of stuff. But she also created like a reflection prompt, and it had I had to have at least 20 questions to like sit with and write about, to reflect on the year gone by, set intentions for the year to come. So very similar. And I think I pulled a ton of cards and just did a not so like formal year ahead, but definitely did a big reading. So for me, that's the actual date of solstice itself. I like to treat that way. In ceremony that I'm going to be holding, there is that, darkness returning to the light. So there is the piece of lighting candles from one candle in the middle, like turning out all the lights, turning out all the candles, lighting the one candle that represents the sun, and then allowing each participant to light their own little candle from that one candle, which is really fun and special. So there's some things that can be done alone, and there's some things that really need people to hold the magic. So I really like both. And this year, for the actual date of solstice, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be in Hawaii. So it's going to be a bit interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to celebrate exactly. I'm sure it won't feel quite so cozy and dark because the light doesn't change quite as much there. And yet it is still the solstice and it is still a magical place. So I'm curious to see what will come through. I'm going to allow myself to go with the flow and decide what I want to do on that day this year. Yeah. And feasting. Oh, we always have, and my family likes to celebrate Christmas on Christmas Day. And so we always do that. We do get together the night before. We have drinks, we have food on Christmas Eve, and then we get up early. Stockings happen before breakfast, and then we have breakfast, and then presents happen after.
That sounded very much like the tradition that we had as well. Stockings, then food. Stockings were like, we can hold the kids off long enough if we can allow them the stockings.
Exactly.
And as we grew up a little bit later, we also had like, you could come down and actually open your stocking. Like you didn't have to wait for mom and dad to come down.
Yeah.
So that actually held us off, that they could sleep for more than like a hot second.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were also very, very much the individuals who went shopping on the 23rd and 24th. Like started Christmas shopping on the 23rd and 24th.
Oh boy.
I love a fly by the seat of your pants. Yeah.
I have not done so this year because everything feels like I don't have enough time right now. But I was my Christmas shopping was done by December 1st person for many, many years. Yeah, not so much anymore, but definitely I don't like leaving things to the last minute. It stresses me the fuck out. I think we touched on this last time. One of my love languages, or like my top love languages, gift giving. And so I have a deep desire to gift really good presents. And so it takes time. So if I haven't gotten it by, like, it's fine if I know what it is and I haven't bought it, but if I don't know what it is and I'm into December, it's like super stressful. So I try to be prepared.
I have a couple of ideas. I have sort of a couple of ideas for my lover this year, but the jury's still out. Let's close off this with, do you have a favorite memory from childhood?
Yes.
Please tell me.
It happened every year. My favorite memory around this time of year was always getting the tree and decorating the tree. And so we would always go out as a family with another big group of families. So I grew up in Canmore, and my parents moved there in their early 20s, and most of them and their friends couldn't afford to be flying home every year for Christmas. And so they started a tradition of gathering together. So there's like a group of 4 or 5 families that we did, Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmases together. And so the one family had a music night on the second Friday in December. And then the next day we'd all go out Christmas tree hunting. And every year my parents were like, why do we do this? We're all hungover. Or maybe it was a Sunday after a Saturday party. I can't quite remember, but we'd go out to the woods. We'd all trek through. We'd be cold. We'd be drinking hot chocolate. We'd find a tree. And then when we got it back, decorating was just so fun, pulling out all of the ornaments. They all have a memory attached. And then once the tree was decorated, until I was like probably into my like preteens, we still did this because my sister's 8 years younger than me. Once the tree was decorated and the lights were on the tree, I would run around the house and turn out every single light. Like the downstairs basement bathroom light couldn't be on. Every light in the house turned out, just the tree. And we'd put on the Nutcracker Ballet Suite and dance.
This is the best. This is a great holiday tradition.
It was amazing. Childhood. It just the magic. Like, looking back, I'm like, my parents just sat there in the dark on the couch watching me and my sister dance. But I have memories of like crawling under the tree and the magical lights and the like drama of the music and interpreting it. And I had seen the ballet a few times. And it was just my favorite and most magical part of the whole season.
We've made a decision. We, the collective, and I have made a decision that if you were to ever go back to school, it needs to be something with theater and performance. It at least has to include elements to that.
Right.
It needs to be a mystery school that includes elements to that, for sure.
Yeah. What about you? What's your magical or favorite childhood memory? It's probably magical.
It's super magical. I actually, younger Ellie, little baby Ellie, probably around, I'd say 5 to 7. We lived on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. To be clear, we lived on a pig farm, which I loved. Out in the middle of nowhere. And my dad would take the truck out into the field with all of us in the back, and we'd carol and look for Santa Claus.
Oh,
it wasn't supposed to be so emotional, but every year I would be like, I think that's Santa. And my parents would be like, yeah, that must be him. Now we have like, follow him on your Instagram and other things. But at that point in life, some years ago, we had an old pickup truck in the middle of a snowy field with a bunch of people drinking probably hot chocolate and other things, libations, other things, and looking for Santa. And it was just so special.
Oh, that sounds so magical. Yeah. So magical.
Yeah, I loved it. We weren't a singing family. We weren't like, some families just sing all the time, but this was one of the times of the year that we sang, and it was lovely.
I love the magic that gets woven into family. I love the connection through song, through food, through carried traditions. And I think that's why I've always just loved this season, because I always felt so close to everyone.
I think that's really what is so great about this time of year, is that there's so much magic woven into the everyday. Magic is really sprinkled into everything that we do at this time. And I think that's what I loved about this time of year, and the whole consumerism was what I had a middle finger for.
The consumerism has seeped earlier and earlier into the year and become more and more fevered. And it's not what it's about. And it's the perfect time of year for bringing the magic into the mundane. And yeah, so that's where the real joy and love of this season comes from.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Before we go, Eileen, do you have anything that is happening for the Woo crew out there to sign up for or to join you?
Well, inside the Patreon, there's going to be a Yule ceremony guide. So if you want to hop on in there, if you want to grab yourself a little bit of ceremony and ritual around Yule to celebrate for yourself or to do with friends, I've dropped a guide in there. And then obviously we do have altar building suggestions and things like that, because again, it's a nice time of year to create or recreate your altar. And then me personally, I have a wait list open to work with me one-on-one in 2024. I'm really feeling this need to shift and again align with the larger movements, the larger seasons, and the recognition that healing and stepping into our potency and our power, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And so I've designed a container, a 6-month one-on-one container space with me to help bring about that transformation, the change, the deep healing work that so many of us need right now. And so the waitlist is open. There's going to be bonuses for being on the waitlist. If you are on the waitlist and you decide to join me and step into that container space, there's some really lovely bonuses attached. And if you're still scrambling for some last minute Christmas gifts, I have soul council sessions available and they make a great gift, if I do say so myself.
They would make a great gift.
Mm-hmm.
This.
And you?
I have books still open and slots still available for the year ahead tarot sessions. So if this is something you're interested in, again, bringing, especially around Yule, this is a great time to reflect back and to look ahead. And so you can book those directly on my website. I'll put the link below. And actually, I do have a program that is launching in January that I'm just going to drop a little tiny hint about now, and I'll continue to talk about it as we move along. But this is a program that is for really, come closer, pull up a chair, the wild woman, or the woman who wants to bring the wild back. We're going to talk about taboo topics. We're going to be talking about things that turn us on. This is all around sacred pleasure. And this is an opportunity to work with me in a small group format in this program that is running for the very first time. And I am just so excited to welcome you in. So Wild Woman program coming January, more details to come.
Beautiful. I love it. Yay.
If you want to come join us over on our Patreon, the membership is open. It is fun. It is fantastic. We are so excited about offering this to all of you. And like we said, we have our Witches Corner that is happening, which is our Q&A, our monthly Q&A. We have book club that is coming up. We just had our new moon card reading, and I'll have more information about cards in the group as well. We have Eileen's Yule traditions and altar building, and it's just like, it's the place for the Woo Crew. It's the official Woo Crew hangout.
And all the behind the scenes, like every time we go off on a wild tangent and we can't fit it in the episode, it's where it's landing.
Exactly. Come find us over there. Come find us on posts. And if you enjoyed this,
so much.
Yeah, tag us in your Instagram, post about us on your Instagram and your stories. Tag us. We're going to share this. And if you have friends that you think would be interested in more Yule in their life and learning more about Yule traditions, then send them this episode. It's one of the greatest. One of the greatest compliments we have is a 5-star review and a referral. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll be dropping in next week with 3 mini-sodes for the week of Christmas, taking a little mini break ourselves.
Yes,
before
indeed.
We regather.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Happy Yule, everyone.
Happy Yule.